All right, good afternoon, class. I'm so sorry about having to reschedule for today, but I thought it'd be easier if I just recorded myself doing the lecture so that we could stay on track. My dog Lloyd, he was not feeling well, I don't think. He's not being himself, so the vet said that I have an appointment today at 2:45, and while I maybe could have gotten our lecture done in an hour and 45 minutes-ish or an hour and a half, I still would have had to go home and get my dog and bring him over to the vet. So thank you for your understanding, and I'm hoping that you guys can use this as a tool to also restudy so that you guys can watch this when you are able. So let's talk about the digestive system today. We looked at the rat last week and had a good visualization of what that rat looks like and their digestive tract. With our digestive system, here's those points to ponder. We're going to kind of look at the structures and the functions of the digestive system. We're going to talk about how carbohydrates, proteins, fats, how they are digested and absorbed into our body. And we're also going to talk about the 3 accessory organs of digestion. We're going to list some common diseases of the stomach and their treatments, as well as other diseases of the colon and their treatments. So we kind of understand what digestive means, right? We eat food every single day and we digest it into our body for absorption of nutrients and energy. The first step is exactly what you think it is. It's ingestion. So we take in food through our mouth. Other animals and mammals are similar to that. There are organisms that ingest their food or their energy in other ways. But for mammals and humans, we ingest our food through our mouths. So there's a picture of some food there. We have mechanical digestion that happens first, which is essentially the motion of our teeth moving to digest the food. Those pieces of food are then going through a chemical digestion, which is through an enzymatic hydrolysis. And we move that down our esophagus and into our stomach. You've probably heard of our stomach being fairly acidic, so the acid and the enzymes in our stomach break down our food into small molecules, and the nutrients are then entered throughout the body, and they are absorbed throughout the body. Then elimination is the undigested material is exited the body through urine and feces. The stages of food processing, so like I said, we have ingestion, digestion, the movement, absorption, and elimination. Those are just some bullet points here that I just explained as well. For the human digestive system, this is a picture in your book. We have some of the main parts of the digestive system. You are recognizing probably the mouth and the stomach. We also found the liver and the intestines in the rat last week. These are just some visualization and also some of the definitions of those different parts of your body. The parts that I'd like us to focus on, in the mouth, we have our salivary glands and the oral cavity of our mouth. Then moving down, we have the esophagus. Here's the esophagus. That's that movement to the digestive tract. You have your stomach, which is here, and your liver. Remember, the rats were unique because they had a multi-lobed liver, which they had 3 lobes. You have your small intestine and your large intestine. So this is the small intestine. This is the large intestine. You have your rectum and your anus down here. Your gallbladder, which is right here. It stores and concentrates bile that the liver secretes. Maybe you've heard of some people getting their gallbladder removed. And then the large intestine is also known as the colon, and maybe you've heard of somebody who's had a colonoscopy before. Here's another flow chart of the pathway that the food follows. When we have food in our mouth, we use our teeth to chew the food into those smaller particles. This is that mechanical digestion after ingestion. In humans, we have 32 teeth in our adult, normal human body, but obviously there are some exceptions to that. especially if some of you guys still have your wisdom teeth. I had all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed when I was a freshman in college. The food is then mixed with the saliva, and this is a chemical digestion. So the saliva has different acidic and enzymes in it that help chemically digest our food. So our teeth and the chemicals help digest our food into small particles that are easy for our body to absorb. The saliva in our mouth is composed of water, mucus, and digestive enzymes. Those 2 digestive enzymes are there for you. The functions are to break down the carbs, wet the food, and lubricate it so that we can move it down our digestive tract and into our stomach and intestines. How do we swallow food? There are lots of muscles in our face and our throat that have a function of how we are swallowing food. I can't remember if it's 23 or 32 muscles that are in our face and our throat that all kind of work together to do that swallowing motion. So once the food is in the pharynx, swallowing becomes a reflex. While you do have to think about swallowing food maybe in the beginning of while you're eating, you're like, okay, I gotta chew, swallow. You're kind of consciously thinking that. There comes a point where eating becomes a reflex, something that we do not think of. It's an involuntary movement. Voluntary movements are the things that you are consciously making your body do, and involuntary are things like breathing and your heart pumping. At one point, it becomes a reflex. The epiglottis covers the voice box to make sure that the food is routed into the esophagus. So we've also heard of the epiglottis. Maybe if you've tried to breathe while drinking water on accident and you start to choke a little bit. My family, we say pipe when that happens. When you get a little bit of water or food into your lungs instead of your stomach, and it kind of looks like a little dam system in your throat, and it allows for the voice box to be covered and for food to be digested in the other side. Food is pushed along the digestive tract by the peristalsis and the rhythmic waves of the contraction of smooth muscles in the wall of the digestive tract. So there are smooth muscles in your digestive tract that are responsible for the reflexes of digesting food. I think we're all pretty thankful that once we swallow our food, we don't really think about it much, and our body kind of just takes over. Over time, this is how that food is moved. So there's a pressure change between those smooth muscles that contracts and reflexes, and it's how the food is pushed down. And as you can see, that darker spot just kind of indicates the food or the digestive food and how it moves along the digestive tract. Here's another visualization of how we swallow food. So you have the hard palate of your food, the food bolus, the nasopharynx, the soft palate, the epiglottis, that's an important part right here. That's that dam-like system. When I say dam-like system, it's kind of like on the water where there's dams. This is when the esophagus is closed, the trachea airway is open, and here's the glottis. Here's some food, all right? We're able to breathe here because we haven't swallowed that food yet. We're able to breathe while we're eating, right? That's kind of pretty good, especially if you chew something for a while. It's also the reason why you can breathe while you're chewing gum, things like that. But now we're ready to move that food down the throat and into the esophagus. So the esophagus opens, but notice how the larynx rises and the epiglottis covers the glottis. So now we have that dam closing the voice box or that airway where we normally would be breathing so that that food can go down our esophagus. And here's that visualization from the last slide of how the epiglottis is closed so that that food can move down our esophagus. And here it goes into the stomach. The lower gastrointestinal sphincter relaxes and the food enters the stomach. So once we're in the stomach, we have some gastric fluid that is made up of hydrochloric acid, which has a pH of 2.0. And this is, and also the enzyme, pepsin. So these enzymes and the acidic in our stomach is how our food is broken down chemically and how it breaks it into small individual molecules that can be absorbed into our body for nutrients. I don't know about you, but when I have something that's really healthy, like a salad, or I like asparagus or broccoli or things like that, I'm like, ooh, I want those nutrients absorbed into my body. So that's what your stomach does without you thinking about it, which is really awesome. We also know that our stomach is fairly acidic when we did the Tylenol experiment at the beginning of the term. If you remember that lab, some of you were in quarantine, but that's okay. We used Sierra Mist to digest or stimulate the digestion of Tylenol, different gel capsules or tablets. And we used Sierra Mist because it had a similar acidic value or a pH value as our stomach did. So we stimulated or simulated the effects of how our Tylenol was absorbed in our body. The protein digestion begins, in the stomach. So if we remember a couple of slides ago, we talked about how the absorption of carbohydrates starts in our mouth. Protein digestion begins in our stomach. A muscular sac with a glandular lining mucosa that secretes the gastric fluid. So that's how that gastric fluid is put into our stomach. And then the stomach empties into the small intestine after 2 to 6 hours. And you probably remember that because maybe when you were a kid, they were like, oh, you can't swim, until your food is digested, which also just depends on the individual. But you know that if you're going to go run a big race or if you're going to do something, it's important to eat 2 to 6 hours before as opposed to right before. Now, everybody is different, but it just means that your food takes about 2 to 6 hours to digest. It depends on the amount of food, the type of food, and the individual's age, height, weight, gender, sex, whatever you want to say there. It just really depends for how long your food is digested. And some people, this can be considered their metabolism. It has something to do with that. It's not entirely the metabolism, but it does have an effect a little bit. So this image here on the bottom, just to give you some reference points, here's that esophagus. That food enters through that esophagus, and we have muscle around the outside that covers the stomach. That mucosa or the mucus and the submucosa are the different linings that we have. And then here we have the sphincter that then empties the food into the small intestine. The anatomy of stomach. So when we say anatomy, it's just the identification of the parts. So here again, we have that esophagus up here at the top. You have your stomach. You have the muscle layers. There are 3 layers of muscle, and then there's a mucosa layer. This is a visualization of the gastric pits of the mucosa. So these are the pores that the mucus or the secretion of the enzymes and the acid are in our stomach. And then this is just showing the muscle contractions here at the bottom. So you have the muscle contractions that are moving away from the esophagus that are releasing the food into the stomach. And then you have the contraction of the muscles kind of pushing that food down and away, and again here down and away towards the small intestine. Those are those 3 layers of muscles that work together. They are smooth muscles that contract involuntarily, thank goodness, right, that we don't have to think about how we digest our food, and they push the food down to the small intestine. Our body's main goal is to breathe, pump blood, and digest food for energy. And so our body wants to do this in the most efficient way as possible while using less energy to digest food, but getting the most absorption of nutrients as possible. People have probably heard of heartburn or GERD before. This is that acid reflux that occurs when the acids from the stomach pass into the esophagus. So acid reflux can have some effects such as like a burning sensation, that heartburn. You may feel some sort of like burping. Acid reflux can be fairly serious, but there are things that can help neutralize that stomach acid, which we see down here. You can take an antacid. You've probably heard of Tums. Maybe that's one of the more common one, or Rolaids. You can also take an acid reducer. This decreases the acid production. I would say that this is a little bit more when you have a bigger problem with your acid reflux. You'll probably take some of these. There's also some prescriptions that a doctor will prescribe for acid reflux. And then there's also a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor. A proton, remember, is those positively charged ions. And the pump is our proton pump helps with the acid and how it is pumping into our stomach. So if we inhibit that proton pump, we are inhibiting the acid. Essentially, it blocks that acid production, like it says here. And here's a couple of other medicinal options for that. GERD is that chronic heartburn. It's called gastrointestinal reflux disease. Excuse me, gastroesophageal reflux disease. That's what GERD stands for. There's also a thing called gastric ulcers, and this is because of a bacterium. I'm not going to try and pronounce that bacteria, but essentially what happens is there is a bacteria that kind of gets into the lining of the stomach, and it affects the digestion of the food, and there also can be some other effects as well. Here, just to give you a little sense of what we're looking at here, that greenish kind of worm looking thing is the bacteria, and this is the kind of cream yellowish white color is that mucosis layer of the stomach. And then it also gives us a reference here. This is how zoomed in we are on this picture. So we're looking at something very extremely small. All right, so we looked at that small intestine, and a few of you asked, how long is the small intestine in the human body? And I said about 6 yards, and I was, or I think I said 6 feet, but it's actually 6 meters long, which is about 18 feet, if there are about 3 feet in a meter. So our small intestine, when we untangle it, would be about 6 meters long. And we saw how long it was in a small rat. It ended up being fairly long when you guys kind of untangled that. It's composed of 3 different portions. These are the 3 portions of that small intestine here. The ducts from the pancreas and the gallbladder empty into the small intestine. So when we have food that is coming down, it empties from the pancreas, and the gallbladder empties into that small intestine. So remember, our gallbladder is what is getting the secretions from the liver, and the pancreas secretes those digestive enzymes. Bile assists in fat digestion and is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder, which is essentially what we just talked about. The small intestine completes most of the digestion of the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So it took this long for us to get to the digestion of fats. The first thing we were trying to digest were those carbohydrates. Protein digestion starts in the stomach, and the fats start with the pancreas and the liver. So we have 3 accessory organs. An accessory is essentially what you think it may be. So when I think of accessories, you think of like handbags, purses, shoes are accessories to your outfit. But the 3 accessory organs to the digestive system are the pancreas, liver, and the gallbladder. Just to give you a little reference point in visualization, we have the gallbladder. It's kind of this greenish color here. The liver is this big lobed here. I'll draw some arrows for you. And then we have the pancreas, which is right here. So you have those 3 accessory organs, which also aid in the digestion of different types of organic molecules. The small intestine is the absorption of digested food, depends on the large surface area created by the numerous villi or finger-like projections and microvilli. So villi, I think of are like these little finger-like projections, and then microvilli are just even smaller than that. And these are aiding the digestion of the food, and it depends on the large surface area created by these finger-like projections. The amino acids and the sugars in the capillaries enter, while the fatty acids and the glycerol enter the small lymph vessels. So this is just talking about in the small intestine, how the absorption of food is digested. It depends on the surface area. And also here it's talking about what happens to those amino acids and sugars. They enter the capillaries while the fatty acids and the glycerol enter the small lymph vessels. Okay, here's just a structure of small intestine, and we got to see that in the rat last week, which was pretty great. But because it is folded, we talked about that surface area to volume ratio. Remember, we want to be the most efficient as possible. We want a large surface area to volume ratio. So we want something that's like 2 to 1 or 6 to 1. Those are super great, super big surface area to volume ratio. Something like 7 to 4 is not as big of a surface area to volume ratio. We talk about that like when you go to a hibachi grill and you cut up your steak into small pieces, and it cooks a little bit faster than if you were to just have a big piece of steak or chicken. So when we have multiple cells, instead of one big cell, we're able to get nutrients in and out very quickly, and this is efficient because of the surface area to volume ratio. We want a large surface area to volume ratio. This is also why the small intestine is folded. It increases the surface area to volume ratio, and it allows us to efficiently digest food. Here's another picture of the small intestine. Here are those villi that I was talking about, those like little kind of finger-like projections here. I'm kind of drawing it. I'm not doing a great job. You can see it here. Plural is villus. You have those blood capillaries, which we talk about here. Remember that the bright red are arteries. These are bright red because they are oxygen rich. And then you have the dark one, the blue color, which are the veins. And they are veins, they are oxygen poor. They are kind of a bluish purple color. And then you have the lymphatic vessel, which is kind of that greenish, grayish, whitish color here. And these are for the recognition of pathogens, infections, and helping aid your body in fighting off essentially foreign invaders. So we have the folding of the small intestine, and then we have these villi that are the villus, and the microvilli here, which is this is a great picture, definitely better than I could draw, that are showing how we increase that surface area to volume ratio. The large intestine is also composed of 3 different parts: ascending, transverse, and descending colon. This includes the appendix. You've probably heard of or seen a movie or something of somebody getting their appendix removed. It's fairly common. The appendix is one of those things that doesn't really have a function in our body, so it's okay if it has to get removed. The water and mineral ions are absorbed in the large intestine. This is also where we identify undigested and unabsorbable food that is then passed through us as solid waste known as feces. Feces are stored in the rectum and the stretchable tubular region just before the anus. Here's another kind of visualization here. Here's the anus down here and the rectum, which is where the feces are expelled from our body. You have the small intestine here attaching to the large intestine, which is where we consider this the colon. You have the ascending part of the colon, and you have the descending part of the colon, which essentially just meaning the direction that is moving. You have the cecum, which we saw in the rat was fairly recognizable. It kind of looked like a little bit of a lima bean, but not exactly, which is where the feces was held. And then they have the sigmoid colon, which is kind of right before the rectum. And you have the anal channel here at the bottom, the internal sphincter, and the external anal sphincter. There are naturally occurring bacteria in our bodies that help our colon digest food. Digest food. You've probably heard of this. You've probably heard of prebiotics and probiotics found in things like kombucha or yogurt. These are also where they help produce various vitamins such as vitamin K. So you've maybe heard of probiotics often being called good or helpful bacteria because they help with your gut health. You can take probiotics as a vitamin, or you can eat them, like I said, in yogurt or kombucha, and this just helps aid in the digestion of food. This is the one that is found in active yogurt cultures. This is just a little summary about the absorption of food. We've got the mouth, esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, kind of moving down through those. I would guess that a good quiz or a test question would maybe be similar to how the blood flows, but how is food digested and absorbed? Walk us through that in a detailed explanation. You know, first it is ingested through the mouth, where we go through a mechanical digestion before moving to the esophagus and the stomach, where we get to a chemical digestion, where the water, glucose, drugs, and alcohol are absorbed. We then move on to the small intestine before going to the large intestine. The small intestine digests the water, glucose, amino acids, and the nucleotides. And then the water is also absorbed in the large intestine. As you can see, water is needed to be digested in all three. It aids in digestion. So just a reminder to stay hydrated as best as possible. There are a couple of disorders of the colon and the rectum. You've probably heard of some of these: diarrhea, constipation, hemorrhoids, appendicitis. Diarrhea is just the increased peristalsis and the failure to reabsorb that water due to either an infection or nervous stimulation. So this is just like more of a liquid feces. And then we have constipation, which is the opposite of diarrhea. This is where the feces are dry and hard, and its condition can be controlled with water or fiber. It's the lack of the elimination of the feces. Then you have hemorrhoids. These are enlarged and inflamed blood vessels of the anus due to chronic constipation, pregnancy, aging, anal intercourse, etc. It can be used with preparation H is one of the prescriptions that can be used to help hemorrhoids. I didn't mention the other prescriptions at the top. The Miralax is a powder that you can put into a liquid, and then the diarrhea Imodium has been known to help with that. Then we have at the bottom there appendicitis. It is the occurrence of the pouches of mucosa from weak spots in the lining that can become infected and often occur in the descending colon. This can be cured, or symptoms can be reduced through antibiotics. Disorders of the colon and the rectum continued. Irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. This is when the intestine contracts with power, but without its normal coordination. It's characterized by chronic diarrhea and abdominal pain. Inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, is a group of inflammatory disorders such as the ulcerative colitis or the Crohn's disease. I used to know somebody who had Crohn's disease. It can be pretty hard for someone. It also can be linked with the indigestion of gluten, polyps, and cancer. So this is why people have colonoscopies, is to check for polyps and cancer in the colon. The reason that colonoscopies and mammograms are two of the most common tests done for taking cancer into consideration is because of the different type of tissue that we have in our colon and our breast tissue. It is quickly turned over. It's the same with skin. So when we have cells that have a quick turnover, you have more you are more likely to have mistakes. And so this is why colonoscopies are fairly common after the age of 50, because looking for polyps and cancer, such as small growths in that epithelial lining. We also find epithelial tissue in our skin, in our breast tissue. So all of those things that have quick cell turnover is where we start to look for benign or cancerous tissues. Here's just a little overview, table 37.5 in your book of the human digestive system. We don't need to go over it again. It just defines each of the anatomy and what it is done to digest the food. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for your understanding of my dog situation. It's kind of nice knowing that although we've had to do a lot of remote learning, that some things like this can help us moving forward in the future. Please reach out via email if you have any questions. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. You will have a lecture assignment that is due on my Wartburg, and we will have lab on Wednesday. We will be doing vaccines, which is really cool because of everything that's going on in the world right now. You guys will actually be giving some vaccines, but don't worry, it's not to humans. We'll be giving some vaccines to fruit, and you guys will be able to use some syringes, which is really cool. You can find the instructions for that on my wartburg.edu under the syllabus section and then under lab instructions. Thanks so much for your guys' understanding. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all on Wednesday.